Have you ever played a video game that left you in a state of shock after you beat it? I can remember several games I've played over the years that left me reeling when the end credits finished. Final Fantasy VI, Bravely Default, 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, multiple Trails games, the list goes on and on. Games with stories, and specifically endings that were extraordinarily impactful to me to the point where it left me speechless, excited, and gushing at the unforgettable memories. The Legend of Zelda series has managed to do this to me a few times, but none surprised me as much as the game we're going to be talking about today. The series' first foray into the portable space, Link's Awakening. Hard to believe that a Game Boy game from 1993 would affect me, a kid who grew up on the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS lines of hardware so strongly. Link's Awakening wasn't exactly a game I was itching to play as a kid, both because I didn't have easy access to it until my middle childhood years, and the fact that it was a Game Boy game. I had already played plenty of other Game Boy versions of franchises, and I wasn't exactly impressed, so what chance did Zelda have? I already struggled with the 8-bit console games and could only imagine what the Game Boy title from 1993 could offer me. Join me today as I explain not only how this game managed to defy the odds and become possibly the best game on its system, but my favorite 2D Zelda game ever made. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. With a successful trilogy of games under their belt, Nintendo had successfully managed to turn The Legend of Zelda into the premier action-adventure franchise for video games. What Mario was to platformers, Link was for top-down adventures. But unlike Mario, whose games were significantly easier to make and far more marketable, Zelda only had 3 mainline releases by 1991. Mario had 6, and while 1990's Super Mario World had captured audiences' hearts and minds, it was only a year before the turn of the decade in 1989 that Mario participated in the launch of one of the most influential consoles ever made. The Game Boy, a system that for all intents and purposes should not have found as much success as it did, lacking a backlight and color display when its competition boasted both. But leave it to Nintendo to take woefully underpowered hardware and turn it into gold. While systems like the Atari Lynx and Sega Game Gear launched with prices in triple digits, a comical amount of money in the early 90s, Nintendo launched their portable system at a far more reasonable $90, and was bundled with Tetris, which catapulted both into worldwide popularity. Super Mario Land was the second major launch title for the system, and it was incredibly unique for a Mario title at the time. Because Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka were both in the process of developing Super Mario World and A Link to the Past, Super Mario Land featured staff that was extremely unique for the series, including Miyamoto's mentor and the Game Boy's primary creator, the late Gunpei Yokoi. In the game, Mario journeyed through a strange new world with some familiar faces and foes, but finding equally exotic enemies and environments. The game wasn't a critical darling, primarily due to its incredibly short length of 12 levels and less than stellar graphics for the time. But its unique character and world designs remain with the series to this day, with some elements like Princess Daisy becoming as iconic to the series as Mario himself. But what about Zelda? Surely Nintendo had plans to release a flagship Zelda for their portable handheld to show the world what adventuring on the go would be like. Not exactly. For the first few years of its life, Link's Awakening was simply an experimental pet project by Nintendo programmers, who would meet up after work to test and play with Game Boy dev kits to see what they were capable of with the tech. It wasn't until after the release of A Link to the Past in 1991 that Takashi Tezuka requested to create a port of A Link to the Past for their popular portable. Upon seeing the work the team of devs had done in their spare time, he was encouraged to create an original title for the system instead. Using the unsanctioned project as a basis, Tezuka opted not to include iconic series elements like the Triforce, Hyrule, Ganon, or even its namesake Zelda. A significant amount of staff from A Link to the Past was brought on, with two names I'd like to point out specifically: Kensuke Tanabe and Yoshiaki Koizumi, two writers from A Link to the Past, who came up with a significant amount of Link's Awakening's setting and plot. Tezuka, spurred on by their own unique ideas, decided to use the popular American television drama Twin Peaks as inspiration. The show was incredibly popular for a variety of reasons, but one of its major draws was the mysterious townspeople of Twin Peaks, how unique and strangely they all acted, and the speculation it created among fans. Tezuka, Tanabe, and Koizumi used this as fuel for Link's Awakening, and in my opinion created one of the most engaging and memorable Zelda worlds we've ever seen despite the hardware. And if you're keeping count, Mario managed to release another platformer in the time it took to release this game. So... But this isn't quite the end of Link's Awakening's development history. For the first time in the series, this game was re-released. Not once, but twice. The first one, Link's Awakening DX, was released in 1998 for the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy's first successor that featured slightly stronger hardware and color display capabilities. The DX version of the game took advantage of the hardware to fix up minor errors from the original game, edit text to make things more clear for the player in specific scenarios, and most importantly, added an entirely new optional side quest and dungeon that was only possible through the Game Boy Color's tech. The DX version was the most popular version of the game for well over a decade, featuring prominently on the Nintendo 3DS eShop from 2011 until its closure a decade later. The game ended up being Nintendo's highest grossing downloadable title from 2011, selling 300,000 copies in 6 months, despite being over 10 years old. This version is so popular that it's the de facto version people talk about when you mention the Game Boy original, despite being a remaster from 5 years after the fact. The popularity and sustained success of the title led to Nintendo creating a third version of the game, this time in crystal clear HD. The development team Grotto, who you will become familiar with over the course of this retrospective, worked on this title instead of Nintendo directly, though they had significant input in the project. This remake aimed to update the game for modern audiences and streamline some of the more archaic aspects of the original releases. More buttons, higher fidelity, and expanding the world meant that this version of Link's Awakening is the most content-packed of the three. But which one is truly the best? Believe it or not, all three versions, from the monochromatic original, the ubiquitous DX remaster, and modern HD remake, all have their pros and cons. As a massive fan of this game, I took it upon myself to play all three versions back to back, top to bottom, to fully cover this game's evolution and attempt to explain my preferences when it comes to the minutiae of this wonderful game. Some quick notes before we fully dive in. To keep things concise, when referring to multiple versions of the game simultaneously, I'll be calling the Game Boy Original OG, the Color Port DX, and the Switch Remake HD for simplicity. My footage of the HD version was also recorded in Hero Mode, indicated by the icon at the bottom left of the screen, so if my damage numbers seem inconsistent across the versions, that's why. For those unfamiliar, Hero Mode is the hard mode that some Zelda games include. In it, enemies deal double damage and hearts do not appear. Mini-bosses will also not yield fairies on beating them, making resource management and positioning more important than a normal playthrough. Link's Awakening starts a trend in the series that I'm sure will be appreciated by a few of you. The plots are no longer primarily told in the manual, and will not require me to spend several minutes summing up plot points that the game either doesn't touch, or repeats to the player in the off chance they weren't reading. Link's Awakening is considered the first plot-driven game in the series for a reason, and a lot of what this game does starts trends that we see across the series in future titles. It was a dark and stormy night. Link is caught in the swirling storm, desperately trying to stay afloat against the aggressive waves. In a flash, Link's boat is destroyed by lightning, and the hero is knocked out. On a tropical beach, an unfamiliar girl is seen on a stroll. Her casual walk is interrupted when she stumbles upon the unconscious body of Link, out cold and without any of his equipment. As she tries to wake him, the camera pans up towards the tallest peak of this land, which features a distinct, large pink-spotted egg nested neatly in the mountaintop. As the remix title theme plays, I'd like to go over the new blood brought on to compose this game. The soundtrack was composed by 3 newcomers to the series, Minako Hamano, Kozui Ishikawa, and Kazumi Totaka. Hamano and Totaka are 2 names Nintendo fans might recognize for their contributions to their favorite games over the years. Hamano is most known for her work on the Metroid series, working on the series to this day. Totaka is almost synonymous with the Animal Crossing franchise's sound identity, to the point where KK Slider, the groovy musical dog, is based on him. I'll go over it more as we move through the game, but I wholeheartedly adore this soundtrack, both the Game Boy and Switch versions. The original Game Boy compositions are incredible, and still impress me with the emotions they draw from me despite the 8-bit hardware. Ryo Nagamatsu handled the arrangements for the HD version, and his work is equally incredible, bringing the sound to life in a fresh and invigorating way. Overall, this soundtrack is my favorite of the original 2D Zelda games by a mile, and all of the composers involved deserve the highest praise. Upon waking, Link is greeted by the young girl who found him washed on the beach. She introduces herself as Marin, and tells Link he's on Koholint Island. Her father, Terran, hands Link his shield. The 2 warn him that since his arrival, monsters have been becoming more aggressive, and to be careful, since he doesn't have a weapon to defend himself. Stepping outside into Mabe Village, Link can interact with the townspeople to find a host of unique and frankly strange individuals, but they're all kind and willing to help Link any way they can. Link heads south to the shore where he washed up, hoping to find any of his other belongings. Unfortunately, most of it seems to have been washed away in the storm, but he does manage to find his sword. Before he can pick it up, a mysterious owl lands nearby and surmises that Link must be here to wake the windfish, and that if Link wants to leave the island, it's his only option forward. With a goal in mind, Link picks up his sword, and the adventure can truly begin. Link's moveset in this game is remarkably similar to how he handles in A Link to the Past. He can swing his sword in 4 directions, the spin attack returns, and in all versions of the game his movement is locked to the 8 directions he was capable of moving in A Link to the Past. On the Game Boy this won't feel too strange since we're controlling Link with a D-pad, but for the HD version, which uses a control stick, it can take some getting used to. Personally, I found using the D-pad to be more precise for navigation, but both options are available if need be. One area that the HD version manages to improve on slightly is allowing Link to swing at a diagonal angle, compared to the originals where his swing was locked to the 4 cardinal directions as in A Link to the Past. One new mechanic that's only in Link's Awakening is the Piece of Power and Guardian Acorn items. These drop seemingly at random from enemies, but are in fact guaranteed depending on criteria. The Piece of Power drops every 30 to 40 enemies depending on how many heart containers you have, and the Guardian Acorn drops every 12 enemies you defeat without taking damage. Both items are buffs, doubling your attack and defense respectively. Conceptually, I enjoy these items. In practice, I don't like them. Why? Every single time you pick one up, the music gets replaced with this repetitive as hell theme. If these items were as rare as, say, an invincibility star in Mario, I wouldn't mind nearly as much, but these things can pop up within 5 minutes of each other pretty consistently. With how good this game's soundtrack is, I cannot stress enough how annoying it is to go from the absolutely beautiful Koholint Island tracks to very generic power-up music. The first area of importance is the mysterious forest, which can be seen as a small taste of the dungeon crawling to come. There's caves, pits, and most peculiar, a trickster raccoon that can teleport Link to a random part of the forest. This is one of the first instances where the HD version can prove to be easier than the 8-bit versions, as the HD camera seamlessly scrolls with Link as he moves through open space. In the 8-bit versions, the game is split into separate scrolling screens that move when Link hits the edges, just like the first and third games. It makes navigation a bit harder, as finding your bearings among the similar-looking tile sets can be disorienting. The HD version's larger field of vision makes it easier to gather where you are, and makes getting lost less of a possibility. Even more cleverly, the HD version does selectively use the scrolling screens when inside dungeons or instanced areas to still create a sense of exploration as you move throughout, but when larger rooms appear, they return to the singular scroll of the overworld camera. It's a great design choice and makes the larger rooms feel appropriately sized compared to their samey claustrophobia of the 8-bit versions. Link needs to get past the raccoon to gain access to the first dungeon, so by collecting a mushroom from the forest and bringing it to a local witch, she creates some magic powder for Link. This acts as our first item for the adventure. Magic powder returns from A Link to the Past, but unlike that game, Link doesn't have a magic meter in this title. That means he has finite uses of the powder, and while 20 may seem like a lot, if you use it liberally, you'll quickly run out and need to return to the witch for more, or get lucky and find some. When you sprinkle the powder on the raccoon, it causes him to sneeze uncontrollably. Eventually, he collapses and transforms into... Terran? He tells Link that he bit into a strange mushroom and had a strange dream about being a raccoon. Okay. As Terran heads back to Mabe Village, Link acquires the Tail Key, and can finally head into the game's first dungeon, the Tail Cave. Compared to the introductory sequence of A Link to the Past, which I praised as being the best intro sequence in the series, Link's Awakening's opening is almost equally strong. It teaches you the controls seamlessly, introduces you to Koholint Island and its foreign yet quirky inhabitants, and the opening areas of the Tonboro Shores and Mysterious Forest act as good introductory areas to teach players the combat and navigational flow of the game. I like this opening a lot, and I think the only thing it truly lacks compared to A Link to the Past is the sense of urgency. In A Link to the Past, Hyrule is in immediate danger. There's a storm brewing both physically and metaphorically right outside Link's house. His uncle dies, he has to fight through an entire castle, and barely manages to sneak away from the chaos. Link's Awakening is comparatively relaxed. Link wakes up, is able to socialize and immerse himself in this new land, and while he does figure out his ultimate goal, there isn't a grand evil threat to defend against. He just needs to find the windfish and wake it up to go back home. Very Wizard of Oz in that sense. The village may have some oddities to it, like an elderly couple that endlessly sweep outside and refuse to talk unless it's over the phone, a woman who keeps chain chomps from Mario as pets, and a man who tells Link to be on the lookout for when he gets lost later on in the game. Yes, this is real dialogue. But it's these oddities that make Mabe Village and Koholint such a unique environment to explore compared to Hyrule of the previous titles. For every familiar face or landmark, there's something equally strange or unique you wouldn't see anywhere else in the land of Hyrule. As Link heads into the Tail Cave, we're immediately blessed with the first major addition to the series before taking our first step: unique dungeon tracks. The previous titles all shared dungeon tracks, with each title only featuring 2 to 3 at most, split between the different areas or final dungeons of the game to make them distinctive from each other. Link's Awakening is the first title to give us a unique track for every dungeon in the game, and it is so much better for it. While not every track is a winner, I appreciate the attempt, and this leads into later titles introducing some of the most iconic tracks in the series. Tail Cave's theme in all versions is a strong start for the track list, creating a sense of unease but being good at motivating the player forward. Graphically, the Game Boy originals do the best they can to make the dungeons stand out from the normal caves you'll find on your adventure, with unique textures and colors depending on your version. The pinkish red walls and blue floors certainly attract the eye more than the standard cave look in the HD version. Not that the HD version looks bad by any means, but its art direction is more standard and less unique here compared to the 8-bit versions, though I do appreciate the way they updated the textures of the more bland tile sets from the originals. Tail Cave as an introductory dungeon is really solid. Immediately, the dungeon's path forks with the northern and western pathway. By heading west, you can find the compass and gain a key that will help with progression further into the dungeon. The compass is far more useful than it was in previous titles, now revealing treasure chest locations as well as alerting the player with this audio cue whenever they come into a room with an unopened treasure. It's another incredible quality of life feature that greatly improves the flow of gameplay and exploration compared to the older titles. Heading north, there's another split pathway. Heading to the left leads through a few enemies and a large central room. Heading to the right does the same, but it's a one-way trip that also grants the dungeon map. Link's Awakening's dungeon maps in the 8-bit originals are about on par with the NES titles, showing each screen and how they connect to each other, now with included treasure markers. The HD version, on the other hand, has an extremely detailed and clear map that players can use to navigate and mark throughout their dungeon trek. In fact, now's a good time to cover the map system of this game in general. It's similar to A Link to the Past, with both overworld and dungeon maps being available to pull up at any time depending on where you are. In the Game Boy versions, the maps are comparatively simple and don't do much to show you specifically where you are, only which quadrant of the map you're in. The HD version is much more detailed, allows you to zoom in and out to better chart where you are in relation to things, and has markers that you can use to remember where things like fairy fountains are. The best way to put it is that the 8-bit versions are competent, while the HD version is perfect for what's needed. Journeying northwest into the dungeon, we can head underground into a side-scrolling segment that features Goombas? Chain Chomps and Goombas, we certainly aren't in Hyrule anymore. After moving through here, we can find the dungeon item, the unique and extremely useful Rock's Feather. It allows Link to jump, doing a cool little flip as he does. It's here where most players in the 8-bit versions are going to run into a small, teensy tiny little quirk that permeates the entirety of Link's Awakening. The Game Boy's control scheme. A Link to the Past was the first title to have a litany of new button options that expanded the flow of gameplay and allows Link to feel more capable than he ever did in his NES ROMs. The Game Boy, in comparison, has the exact amount of buttons the NES controller did. 2 face buttons, start, select, and a D-pad. So, how did the devs work around this restriction? That's the neat part. They didn't. You might have noticed at the start of the game that Link's sword and shield were both mapped to buttons at the bottom of the screen. The sword being mapped to A isn't new, but the shield? That was always a part of Link, a bodily function akin to breathing. If you weren't attacking and facing a projectile, Link would block it, simple as that. Now, even if you have the shield equipped, you need to hold the B button to raise it. Sounds fine enough, it makes combat more intentional on the player's part and encourages thoughtful movement in chaotic situations. But then, how do we use the Rock's Feather? Every button on the Game Boy is being used now. Well, you have to say goodbye to either your sword or shield. For the first time in the series, you can opt to simply not have the sword, shield, or both equipped at any point. Early on, this isn't the best idea, of course, as your sword is the only form of offense you really have. But as you progress and find more and more items to play with, Link's Awakening can end up having some of the most unique combat in the series, depending on how you approach it. The only problem lies in the fact that every single time you want to swap items, you have to pause and go to the menu, equip the item, use it, then swap back. In the Game Boy originals, I basically never used the shield for this reason, opting to run the Rock's Feather and avoid attacks entirely while enhancing my mobility. This is another area where the HD version wins out over its older counterparts. With a myriad of buttons, Link's items can be appropriately mapped to keep the flow of gameplay up. The sword, shield, Pegasus Boots, and Power Bracelet are now permanent fixtures to Link, meaning a significant amount of time is saved not needing to pause and swim through menus to lift one thing and move on. With the Rock's Feather in hand, you can cross gaps that most Links wouldn't be able to before. Using this, we can get the boss key and take the opposite pathway to the east we didn't before. This brings us to the dungeon's mid-boss, the Spike Roller. This boss requires the Rock's Feather, both to get in and to fight him. I like this fight a lot, though not for its challenge. I just find it fun to hop over the rolling spikes and wail on this squishy pink guy. The movement of the jump in this game is really nice, and it makes combat very engaging. Beating him reveals another new trend that this game would introduce to the series, a dungeon teleporter. By stepping into this light, Link is taken back to the start of the dungeon, and by stepping through that light, comes right back to the mid-boss room. This is a very welcome addition for many reasons, the most obvious being that since this was a portable experience, it allowed for players to save after the boss fight and turn the system off if need be, without having to run through the dungeon in its entirety. Nowadays, even if you're playing at home, the teleports are a nice quality of life feature in case you miss something or need to leave the dungeon for any reason and come back later. After beating the Spike Roller, there's only one room left in the dungeon before the boss fight. This room has an optional lower area that really shocked me as a kid, where you can find decomposed corpses hanging from the ceiling. What in the world could have done this? Is the responsible party down here? It unnerved me as a kid and made me get the hell out of there quickly. Climbing back up and heading into the boss room, we come face to face with Moldorm. Back from A Link to the Past with a new green look in the Game Boy titles and a much larger frame in the HD version. Regardless of what version you play, this is an incredibly easy fight. In A Link to the Past, Moldorm moved much faster than he does here, and had multiple pits he could push you in. In Link's Awakening, he's not only much slower, but he doesn't seem to directly attack as much as wander aimlessly. In the HD version, you can use both Rock's Feather and the shield at the same time, making avoiding damage even easier than it already is. Overall, I don't mind this too much, as it is the first dungeon, but it's humorous seeing such an infamous boss from the previous game end up so thoroughly declawed in this one. And if you're curious, those corpses we saw earlier, Moldorm killed them. Somehow. I feel like they kind of deserved their fate at that point. After we beat Moldorm, we get our first of many heart containers and the Full Moon Cello. It's not immediately clear what it's for, but the owl meets us outside to explain that the cello is part of a set called the Instruments of the Sirens. These instruments will be instrumental in waking the Windfish, and combining their power will allow us to do so. The owl explains that he was instructed to guide Link, and that his next goal is to the north in the Gopanga Swamp. With a clear understanding of what's needed to leave the island, Link heads back to Mabe Village. Tail Cave is a solid, if safe, starting dungeon. I like a lot of what it does, with the branching pathways and ability to change up how you journey through it on subsequent playthroughs if you so choose. Unfortunately, I think there are some issues with the dungeon present in all versions that serve to break the pace a little bit. The first is this inclusion of a bombable wall that hides an optional collectible. This is used for a side quest in the game, and while it isn't required to beat the dungeon, I find it annoying to have to come back to dungeons later in the game for one thing that was restricted earlier. Second, the stone tablets/beaks that Link can find. These act as your hint system for this game, and while I appreciate the attempt, I find the tablets in the original Game Boy release too few and far between to really matter, and the beaks in the DX and HD versions too plentiful and pitiful to matter. While I didn't like Sahasrarla's tips in A Link to the Past, there was no item requirement to use them, and it was entirely optional. Here, they're optional, but now require an item to access them, meaning you might figure out what they're hinting at before you even access their hints. Overall though, the dungeon manages a good balance of engaging exploration, exciting new enemies, and introducing the general design philosophy of the dungeons in this game. I think it's the best of the starting dungeons we've seen to this point in the series, but outside of the Eastern Palace, there wasn't big competition. The HD version scores a little higher for its zoomed out camera, allowing the central room to feel appropriately scaled, and allowing for the use of the sword, shield, and Rock's Feather simultaneously. But all versions of this dungeon are great introductions to Link's Awakening, and what the game as a whole will entail. Returning to Mabe Village, the town is in a tizzy, and the kids rush to explain that monsters came and attacked while we were exploring. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but Madame Meow Meow's pet dog Bowow was kidnapped. Have no fear, ma'am. Link will save them. After storming their hideout and beating a mini-boss, we find the missing Chain Chomp no worse for wear. You know, looking at the little guy, he's pretty cute. Maybe we should help Madame Meow Meow out and take him for a walk. I'm sure it'll be good for him. Jesus. Were they starving you in there? Yes, using Bow Wow as a weapon is the actual way forward. His insatiable hunger for the bones of beasts means that you can have fun mowing through enemies and the environment alike, and use him to grant access to the next dungeon. If you're playing the HD remake, you can stumble onto an exclusive character to this version here, Dampé. This friendly underbite is a recurring character who got his start back in the 3D era of Zelda titles, but for this version of the game, Grotto decided to give him a new job. Dampé tells Link that he digs stuff up around the island, and he's more than welcome to come to his shack to see what he has. While we don't do that now, if you're playing the HD version and going for full completion, you'll want to heed that advice. For now though, we journey into the dungeon of the Gopanga Swamp, the Bottle Grotto. You might think that this means bottles are a mechanical part of the dungeon, but no. It's named that because it's shaped like a bottle. Very clever. What's not clever is that this dungeon is extremely linear, and doesn't really challenge the player in any unique ways. It's not a terrible dungeon, and I've said before that linearity in Zelda isn't a problem if handled well, but this is not a great example of that. On a more positive note, the crystal switches from A Link to the Past are back. In the Game Boy titles, they're both one color regardless of version. In the HD version, they're more reminiscent of the Link to the Past versions, making it clear which blocks will rise and fall when struck. Visually, I like the original versions of the dungeons just fine, but I can't help but notice the samey looking textures that the first dungeon used. The DX version does use a blue coloring to make it stand out, but it's not the greatest evolution. The HD version does a wonderful job updating it, with a dank dark blue color and the occasional plants growing out of the ground because of the humid swamp environment inside. The water from the swamp even pools at the entrance of the dungeon. It's a really nice detail. In fact, my favorite puzzles in the dungeon are the crystal switch ones, because they implement the jump and layering in creative ways the rest of the early Zelda titles didn't often do. The best part of the dungeon though? The music. The original track is eerie and a bit spooky in a G-rated way. I find the 8-bit renditions really good, and love how they set the tone for a dungeon that even features darkness as a puzzle mechanic. But the HD version takes an already good song and makes it absolutely incredible. The depth, the instruments. I'm not a professional music understander by any stretch of the imagination, but Ryo Nagamatsu was working genuine magic here, bringing this 8-bit track to the modern day. But now we have to talk about gameplay in this video game, and it's unfortunately just okay. Nothing in this dungeon is blatantly awful, but the way the exploration is handled is very mindless. You start the dungeon and have to zigzag back and forth a few times, but once you've managed to figure out the order of operations at the beginning, the last 70% of the dungeon is a straight line. It's extremely railroaded, to the point it feels like going through the motions more than anything. And past the first segment, you won't have a single challenge that lasts more than a screen, so your journey becomes, go here, complete a puzzle, move to the next room, beat some enemies, go to the next room, etc. The most engaging parts of the dungeon are the new things it introduces, but the dungeon doesn't seem confident enough to introduce very much, or extend those ideas for very long. The dungeon item is the Power Bracelet, and oh boy. In the original Game Boy releases, this item is one of the poster children for the poor inventory management system. In Zelda 1 and A Link to the Past, this was a part of Link's natural moveset. He could push/lift small objects from the start, and the power items only improved his strength. I guess Link was out long enough from the shipwreck for muscular atrophy to set in, because until now, he couldn't lift jack squat. Now with the bracelet, he can! If it's equipped. This means that if you come across something you need to get out of your way, you are almost guaranteed to pause, equip, lift, move on, then go back to what you were previously using. Another win for the HD version, the Power Bracelet is not only a part of Link as it should have been in the OGs, but it's much snappier to use too. In the Game Boy version, you had to press the item button and pull back, as if leveraging it off the ground. A neat idea, but it served to further break the pace. In the HD version, it's a context-sensitive button, press to lift, and another to throw. Simple and smooth. The mid-boss of the dungeon is the Hinox, who's been promoted from his common enemy status in A Link to the Past. We love upward mobility. These guys are really aggressive now, throwing bombs, charging you, and even throwing you across the room. While it's not overly difficult, the dynamism of the fight is fun and engaging. After unlocking the teleporter, there's only a straight shot to the end of the dungeon. If you grab the stone beak at the beginning of the dungeon, consider yourself lucky. If Tail Cave's hints were nearly useless, then this one in Bottle Grotto is nearly required to know what to do. The secret to this room is killing the enemies in a specific order. Up until this point in Zelda history, this has literally never been done. Made worse by the fact that the Pole's voice is returning from the first game, but now unable to be defeated with Link's sword. The only way to beat them is through good old-fashioned blunt force trauma. If you get to this room and don't realize how to kill a Pole's voice, which is very possible as none have been required to kill until this room, and don't have the owl statue hint, you may very well get stuck. Just don't do what a good friend of mine ended up doing.
Many years ago, in another time, another place, a young boy whom we'll call Nova was stumbling through Link's Awakening on his dimly lit Game Boy Advance. Though there were many stumbling points on his way through the early game, he remained steadfast and eventually worked his way to the end of Level 2, the Bottle Grotto. Combing through the dungeon, he was able to find the map outlining every room there was to explore, a stone tablet for deciphering hints scrawled on the wall, and the compass pointing out rooms with treasure chests. It even has a new feature, a tone that tells you when a key is hidden in a room. Important for sure, and the game made sure to remind him of this every time. With these in tow, finding the small keys were a cinch. Even found the magic croissant for lifting jars. However, one item still eluded our protagonist, the Nightmare Key. A hint in the dungeon clued him in on where it could be found. First, defeat the imprisoned Pole's voice. Last, Stalfos, it read. After a quick search, both in the dungeon and on Google to figure out just what the heck a Pole's voice even was, he found the room. A Pole's voice hidden behind a set of pushable blocks with a Stalfos and key guarding it. Paying mind only to the enemies referenced in the hint and not its phrasing, Nova cleared out the room in the order he found most straightforward.
Well, it'd be tricky to kill the Pole's voice while I'm being attacked by these other two guys, so I should probably take them out first,
he mused to himself. However, not a key in sight, only a nightmare for the boy. A grim possibility that maybe the game was bugged? Surely. Every other guide he found didn't make note of this room, and while the way they killed the enemies had seemed a little strange, everything else should be correct. Begrudgingly, he would reset his save file, hoping to avoid the issue that locked him out of completing the dungeon, and he would do this again, and again, and again. Countless times off and on over the course of a handful of childhood years, trying different approaches to the dungeon each time, maybe coming at the room from a different way, or using magic powder to kill the enemies, but alas, nothing. In sheer desperation, the boy recalled an old piece of trivia regarding the Pole's voice back when he was researching the game. In the old Japanese version of Zelda 1, the Pole's voice could be killed by loud noises spoken into the mic of the Famicom controller. So, out of other options, and willing to try anything at this point, Nova got in close to his Game Boy, took a deep breath, and... But alas, the only thing he destroyed doing that was his lungs. And so, spirits broken, he shut the game off. The cartridge would become lost to the sands of time, and while the remake of the game roughly 2 decades later would give him the redemption he sought, it is said that the puzzle still haunts him to this very day.
Big thank you to my good friend StupidStudiosN for regaling me of this grand tale as we discuss the game. It's stories like these that push me to make these videos, and I hope you guys found this story as amusing as I did. With everything else out of the way, we can discuss the boss of the dungeon. And boy, what a clown. I mean, look at him. Genie here is unique across all 3 versions of the game, so we'll start with his monochromatic appearance and move forward successively. In the original release, the Genie fight wasn't difficult, but it was a tight challenge of mobility. You need to dodge fireballs until he goes back in his bottle, then hurry to throw it against the wall. Do this until it shatters, and Phase 2 will start. In the second phase, he'll use illusions to dance around the room and throw Link off. Be ready and swing at him when he stops to attack, and you win. In the DX version, Genie's attacks are all slower and easier to avoid. I'm not sure why this was done, as I mentioned, the fight wasn't that difficult to begin with. However, the HD version changes the fight even further. The fireballs are sped back up, but the arena has been expanded, allowing for more room to maneuver around them. The second phase has been adjusted to make the fireball attack larger but slow, and include a wild swinging animation as Genie charges you. Overall, I think the original and HD versions are the 2 best versions for offering a semblance of challenge compared to DX's slower attack speeds. All of them are a bit on the nose about telegraphing his weakness, unfortunately, but otherwise the fight is perfectly serviceable. Beating him earns us the Conch Horn, the second of the instruments needed to leave Koholint. The Bottle Grotto isn't as much of an escalation, it's more a continuation. Hell, I'd argue Tail Cave is a better dungeon since it manages to have better non-linear exploration, and puzzles that span multiple rooms. Here, the moment-to-moment gameplay is perfectly competent, but it's locked between each individual screen, making this feel segmented and disjointed compared to a fully realized dungeon with cohesive elements. Which actually segues perfectly into our next segment. Dampé's Shack. Well, more specifically what you can do in said shack. For the first time in the series, you can create your own Zelda dungeon. Sort of. The dungeon creation in this game is the equivalent of creating Frankenstein's monster. None of the rooms are original, all of them taken from dungeons you've completed previously on your adventure. This means that the aesthetics of the dungeons are completely out of sorts, where you can end up with Tail Cave parts leading directly into late-game dungeons with no cohesiveness. Where the creativity comes in is how players will stitch them together through the various templates on offer, creating never-before-seen sequences in Link's Awakening. As you play the game, you unlock new challenges and rooms that you can use to further your dungeon building capabilities and unlock collectibles for Link. While none of it is required, this is far and away the most involved side quest in any version of the game. While the creation suite on its own isn't the best, restricting room placements and pathways based on the templates handed to you, what would make this go from a neat gimmick to a cool feature is the ability to share these with other players online. What a shame then that they didn't do that. You can share your creations with others, but it requires an external piece of plastic called an amiibo. If you aren't in the know, amiibo are Nintendo's collectible line of figures that will unlock occasional goodies or functions in some of their titles. While none of them have ever been required for maximum enjoyment of their associated games, Link's Awakening HD seemed to use them as a band-aid for the bullet wound that is not having online connectivity. Why add a player-driven creation suite without the ability to interact with other players? Super Mario Maker's entire premise was built on this idea, and Link's Awakening HD seemed to believe the 3DS version, which also didn't have an online sharing hub, was the version to emulate. It's a shame, because while I didn't see this dungeon builder being a mainstay in the Zelda community for a long time, the lack of online support killed it before it could spread its cobbled-together wings. Oh, and if you're wondering what the Game Boy versions had in place of this, well, the original had nothing. Just an empty map tile. Riveting. But the DX version has a photographer who, upon first interacting with him, will occasionally pop up to take pictures of Link on his adventure. It's a really cute, entirely optional activity that adds a lot of charm to an already charming game. Some of these pictures are entirely inaccessible to you depending on your actions as well, meaning if you want a save file with every possible collectible, that won't be happening. It adds a touch of personalization to every adventure, and I really appreciate that. Bouncing off of the dungeon builder, I think now is an appropriate time to bring this up. At this point in the game, the 8-bit versions and HD versions begin to diverge more significantly in how players will progress. With the addition of the Dungeon Builder, Link's Awakening HD will ask players to make pit stops on their adventure several times throughout the adventure to complete Dampé's challenges. These challenges include major rewards like heart pieces. The original games on Game Boy only feature 12 heart pieces, half the amount from A Link to the Past, but an appropriate amount for a portable Zelda title on a Game Boy. The HD remake adds a whopping 20 to that count, resulting in 32 heart pieces to collect. This alone massively shakes up how Link's Awakening plays. In the original game, it's impossible to enter the first dungeon with more than 3 hearts. On Switch, you can enter with a cool 4, which is pretty rare for the start of a Zelda title. While I enjoyed this change initially and found the new collectibles an exciting discovery process, I now find them unnecessary and a source of the HD version's biggest issue: bloat. The biggest example of this is the new collectible this game added, Secret Seashells. These guys are unique in the series, in that while they are needed for a side quest, you don't need to collect every single one for 100% completion. In the 8-bit versions. On Game Boy, there are 26 seashells across Koholint. Collect 20, and you're done. The other 6 will disappear forever, and your save will still be 100% complete. Simple, concise, and the shells only serve to unlock one major upgrade, the Koholint Sword. Meanwhile, the HD version nearly doubles the total amount of shells to 50, and while you don't need all of them for the sword upgrade, if you want a fully completed file, you do need to collect all 50. This flies in the face of the original game's design, and is honestly just baffling on Grezzo's part. I understand that for $60 they more than likely want to ensure players got their fair share of playtime out of the game. Hell, my footage for the HD version is nearly 5 hours longer than my Game Boy runs. Part of that is because of my choice to 100% it on Hero Mode. I was more methodical, careful, and needed to do a lot more to complete the game. That was my choice at the end of the day, and I recognize that. In the same vein, a lot of what's required to fully complete Link's Awakening HD is simply just more. More heart pieces, more seashells, more dungeons through Dompe, more fishing, more crane game, more river racing. It's not a terrible idea in theory, but I find in practice it takes a game that has a remarkably brisk pace and slows it down, and not in the way that I find engaging. Instead of expanding on the interesting narrative elements, characters, or world of Koholint, it's just dangling keys in front of your face saying, "Ooh, you like health, don't you? You want your sword upgrade, don't you? You want every shiny collectible on that save file, don't you?" It's the simplest solution to a problem the original games didn't have. There is one new collectible I can appreciate, and that's the fairy bottle. In the 8-bit originals, bottles didn't exist at all, and the only consumable item was the secret medicine you can get from Crazy Tracy. This was your replacement for fairies, reviving you upon death if you fell. While fairies are in Link's Awakening, they can only be collected as they are found and not stored, meaning they function as they did in Zelda 1. In the HD versions, through the bottles they act as the potion replacement. Instead of red potions healing hearts, you can capture and store fairies for later use. This makes Hero Mode especially much more relaxing to go through. Be careful though, as they do not automatically revive you. That's still what the secret medicine is for. It's at this point in the adventure that you'll find doing side activities and interacting with the people of Koholint isn't just a charming side activity for dialogue, but sometimes required to progress. The item gating in Link's Awakening doesn't just extend to your equipment, but also to a new type of side quest, a trading sequence. When you first wash up on Koholint and explore around, your eye may be drawn to this familiar looking doll in the crane game. Collect it, and lo and behold, it's Yoshi. While there doesn't seem to be a use for it in our hands, if we ask around, we find a mother in town whose child loves Yoshi, and she offers to make a trade with us. You can see where this is going. Through bartering, Link will assist the people of Koholint with their issues through a myriad of humorous situations. The entirety of the trade quest is not required to complete the story, but you will want to have bananas by this point. Why? Well, after coming across a prince named Richard, he explains to us that he fled his castle after his royal guard went berserk. Richard tells us that if we can go get his golden leaves from Candlelit Castle, he'll assist us in our quest. Fortunately, Link is well versed in traitorous castle guards. Candlelit Castle is surrounded by a moat, and unfortunately, Link can't swim. This means that we need the help of some nearby monkeys, who will take the bananas from our possession in exchange for building a bridge across the Candlelit. Oh, and a stick, because there's no greater accomplishment in life than finding a cool stick. Candlelight Castle is a combat challenge that requires some keen eyes, but nothing over the top. As you sneak in, you'll battle more and more enemies until you come across a ball and chain enemy, returning from A Link to the Past. If you manage to defeat the correct enemies around and in the castle, they'll drop the leaves Richard wanted. Deliver them to him, and he'll allow access to the field behind his home, which houses the key for the next dungeon. These two areas are essentially soft item checks for the player. You need to have started the trading quest, have bombs, and find a shovel in your inventory to access every portion of this quest, and by having them, you'll be able to finally dig up the slime key, which opens our third dungeon. Welcome to the Key Cavern. The key to solving this dungeon is finding the remarkable amount of keys laid around the dungeon. By keying into the many locked pathways and keeping an eye out, players will unlock a new appreciation for the exploration and navigational puzzles Key Cavern offers. With a whopping 9 small keys, this dungeon has the most small keys of any dungeons in the series, and will make sure players keep an ear out for the compass tone. I promise that I won't say key for the rest of the dungeon. The dungeon is of course shaped like a door unlocking tool. Thankfully, unlike the Bottle Grotto, the shape doesn't get in the way of a fun and creative map design. Despite having a long stretch of linear pathways, there are plenty of branching pathways and creative gates that force players to explore and poke around for more items to progress. This is a significant step up from the first 2 dungeons, expanding on the lessons learned from those, and even creating new ways to explore. A good example is the bombable walls the dungeon includes. There are several areas in this dungeon that feature walls you need to bomb out to progress. Normally, these walls would be cracked to indicate to the player what needs to be done. In this dungeon, the player is instructed both with an owl statue hint, as well as through the environment that sometimes bombable walls won't be visually obvious. You need to poke around and listen, or look carefully for any indication that the wall is bombable. The dungeon's music is a matter of versions for me. I find the composition really good, but the Game Boy's instrumentation limits it from really flourishing. The HD version, on the other hand, does a spectacular job updating it. For being the 3rd dungeon in the game, the sound is really intimidating and foreboding, but peters off into a more inquisitive and exploratory tune. I adore it, and found myself listening to it a lot as I wrote this script. In a reversal of the Link to the Past style dungeons, this one opts to start out fairly linear and open up significantly as you go in. This makes subsequent playthroughs of this dungeon much more freeform and unique compared to other dungeons across the series. Set open areas where players will eventually come across the dungeon's mini-boss, a pair of Dodongo snakes. If you remember Dodongos and their dislike of smoke, then these guys aren't any different. Visually, they're cute little guys, but in practice, they're essentially more telegraphed versions of their Zelda 1 predecessors. Because of their segmented bodies and the squirmy method in which they move, it's much easier to know when and where to place bombs for them to snack on, though this doesn't mean they won't be stubborn occasionally. Once you beat them, the dungeon's item is available. And remember when I said, the dungeon item is the Power Bracelet, and oh boy. In the original Game Boy releases, this item is one of the poster children for the poor inventory management system. Yeah, this is the second one. Say hello to the Pegasus Boots, my favorite item in A Link to the Past, and it returns in nearly its full splendor. Hold the corresponding button, and Link will dash forward until you let go, or he collides with an obstacle. Now, because of the Game Boy's smaller screen size, the boot's usefulness isn't quite as strong, only because of the constant scrolling you'll encounter in the overworld and dungeons. This is of course made even worse by the fact that this isn't a built-in ability, and that every time you want to use it you have to pause, equip the boots, and then use it, forgoing another item you may need to progress. I understand that at the end of the day, it is less a game design issue and more so a hardware issue. The Game Boy only has so many buttons to work with after all. But it is a legitimate reason to recommend the HD version over the Game Boy titles, because just like A Link to the Past, the boots are tied to their own button at all times, and the larger areas before the screen scrolls means you can run uninterrupted for much longer distances. This keeps the pace of play up significantly, and means when the game asks you to use the dash combined with other items like the sword or rock's feather, you don't have to potentially swap out both item slots. I don't envy the original dev team for having to work around the limited options on the Game Boy, but I feel like it could have been solved more creatively than constant menu navigation. Despite the cumbersome method of use in the original titles, the dungeon itself makes great use of them. The immediate area where you get the boots shows players how to dash through specific crystals, and the large gaps that were formerly uncrossable are now made simple in a single bound. Using this to backtrack and explore the remaining areas, we can finally collect the rest of the door openers and make our way to the boss. If there's a boss here. A voice is taunting us, but I don't see anything. Maybe if I poke around a bit. Oh, there he is. Looks like Vitreous has a bigger, lamer cousin in the wings. Let's see if he's any better. Nope, he certainly isn't. Slime Eyes is a complete and total joke. The only creative part of the fight is using the Pegasus Boots to split the viscous creature in two. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to wildly swing your way through the fight without consequence. Beating Slime Eye gets us the third instrument and first new weapon of our adventure, the Sea Lily's Bell. Was that? Oh. Damn. Well, I guess we can't bludgeon enemies with an instrument yet. Man, I can't wait to cover Hyrule Warriors. Finishing the Key Cavern. Yes, I did manage to go through that entire segment without saying key again. Players will run into another crossroads. If you're playing the original monochrome version, you can start your way to the 4th dungeon without worry. But if you're playing the DX or HD versions, which is extremely likely considering their easier availability, you have the option to play through an optional hidden dungeon. When Nintendo decided to originally re-release the game back in 1988, this was the primary selling point they advertised on the box itself. Man, what a tacky looking explanation. It's no new funky mode or featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series, that's for sure. The HD version includes this dungeon as well, and makes even further changes that we'll dive into in a moment. To access it, you need to go to the library on the western side of Mabe Village. If you came here earlier, there was a book here you couldn't reach because Link is an itty-weedle baby boy with short legs and stubby arms. It's okay though, because with the Pegasus Boots and Blunt Force Trauma, we can knock the book down similarly to the Book of Medora. Reading it, the book lists out sequential instructions. New World of Color under the 5 gravestones. Try with all your might. Open a new path. Whoever is worthy receives the power of color. Following their instructions by defiling the dead in a particular order, we can climb down and access the Color Dungeon. Fun fact, Game Boy Color games came on 2 variations of cartridges, black ones that mirrored the original Game Boy's gray carts, and clear ones that had a different shape that only the Game Boy Color could operate. The DX version had a black cartridge, which meant that you could feasibly enter the Color Dungeon in monochrome, but these two gentlemen, Gar and Dion, will tell you to shove off if you try to proceed further. It's a cute detail, and one they didn't have to include at all, but I love that it's there. The Color Dungeon itself is unremarkable. It's not bad, but it doesn't do anything to elevate itself either. In the grand scheme of both this game and the series, it's an extremely basic dungeon with basic puzzles, a basic aesthetic, and basic ideas that aren't expanded on in any interesting ways. In fact, the best part of the dungeon is the music. Does this sound familiar to you guys? That's right, it's a remix of the Zelda 1 dungeon theme. The DX version is more faithful to the original tune and does a good job updating it. The HD version goes a step further and adds an entirely new segment that I find really fitting with both Link's Awakening and Zelda 1. The additional segment gives the sound the split, foreboding, exploratory feeling that the other dungeon tracks across the title share, and I greatly enjoy it. Unfortunately, the rest of the dungeon is just okay. Visually, it's fine with a very generic tile set that only stands out because of the bright colors all over the place through puzzles and enemies. The exploration is fine with 2 major pathways, one to the boss key and one to the boss itself. Where things falter is in the design of said pathways. There's no central area to this dungeon, and that means when you run into dead ends or need to backtrack, you have to retrace your steps every single time. It's nice that they don't railroad you into doing anything and allow you to forge ahead at your own pace, but since you can end up getting all the way to the boss door without the corresponding key, it would be nice if the dungeon included some considerations for faster return trips to places we've been before. Things don't get any better with the puzzles. They're of course designed after the namesake of the dungeon, and all feature color prominently. This, in and of itself, isn't a bad idea. Video games are an inherently visual medium after all, and the Game Boy Color's entire gimmick was the added palette to its pixels. Sadly, the puzzle design feels almost childish. None of them extend further than the room they're in, meaning they require little thought, if at all. In fact, the only one I can say is remotely decent are these color switch puzzles, where you need to match the entire room to a single color. These require a modicum of pattern recognition and thought. Everything else? You can turn your brain off and do these. One thing that the HD version corrects that I didn't even register as an issue was the inclusion of shapes on the colored objects throughout the dungeon. It's a nice accessibility feature, and while it does make the color gimmick of the color dungeon less impactful, it barely had an impact to begin with, so no big loss. Thankfully, the dungeon does include multiple unique enemies that you won't find anywhere else in the game, and some are pretty neat. These gooey guys blend into the floor when you first stumble across them, and while they're easy to beat, it's rare for Zelda games to use camouflaged enemies like this. Hilariously, the HD version kind of defeats the purpose by having their texture reveal them over the color anyway, so I guess there's no version where these guys completely win. The dungeon has 3 boss fights in it, and while none of them could be classified as challenging, I do at least enjoy 2 of them. The giant buzz blob is completely immune to your sword at first, and requires you to sprinkle magic powder on it. Nothing crazy, but it's a neat little 1-2 punch. The second mini-boss is the Dekudon Avalanche Stone Hinox? Why does this thing have 3 names? Anyways, this is the hardest boss of the dungeon. He slams the ground and releases boulders towards Link, and each slam stuns the hero. You need to rush around the spikes on the ground and bouncing boulders to slash at him before he leaps again. Do this 8 times, and he goes down. The dungeon's boss is the hard hit beetle, and wow, talk about phoned in. If it wasn't clear before, this makes it blatantly obvious that this place wasn't given the same attention and thought as the other dungeons in this game. Sure, the boss fights haven't impressed up to this point, but considering how many creative ways they could have implemented color into this fight, it's disappointing it's used purely to indicate its health. Ironically, the best way to beat this thing is to bum rush it, as allowing it to stay up longer or attacking it slowly will cause it to spawn Stalfos and make the fight more chaotic. So if you want to be efficient, you have to disengage from the boss's mechanics, but if you want to see what the boss is capable of, you have to stall. It's poorly thought out and a real whimper for the DX version's only original level content. Beating the boss does reward us with not a heart container. Okay, in the DX version, this makes sense. It was using the original as a base and wasn't going to add hearts that weren't in the original game. But, the HD version sure did, so why not put one here? So we could play the rigid and clunky dungeon builder minigame? Ugh. Thankfully, you don't leave here empty-handed. In the room that would ordinarily reward us with an instrument, a fairy is willing to offer Link his choice of colored tunic. Red to double his attack power, or blue to double his defense. These are great optional rewards, as without them, I don't find Link's Awakening a challenging game at all. On normal difficulty. The Game Boy titles are easy and simple enough, I don't feel the need to use these tunics outside of collecting everything. In fact, I argue that they kind of neuter an already easy game's challenge by giving players either insanely fast enemy encounters or giving them double health in a game where you won't be taking a ton of hits anyways. But for the HD version's hero mode, this was almost a requirement for me. I used the red tunic in the DX version until I upgraded my sword, then ran with a doubled offense and defense for the rest of the game. Basically, easy mode. In hero mode, the blue tunic put me back on level playing ground and damage values that I was used to, and without heart drops, I still needed to be careful in dungeons and make sure I was stocked up on fairies and secret medicine. I really think hero mode is the best way to experience this game if you want to challenge yourself as you play. Overall, the color dungeon is kind of disappointing. Of course, it's optional content that wasn't part of the original game's design, but that doesn't excuse it from feeling really tacked on and somewhat haphazard. The most disappointing part to me is simply the potential that could have come from using the color tech of the GBC to create cool and unique puzzles for this title. While the HD remake remembered that colorblind people exist and fixed the visual issues that would arise from this, the lack of challenge, long-term puzzles or progression, and visual flair for a dungeon based around color leaves this place feeling underwhelming and shallow, hardly deserving of a big advertising bubble on the box art. The next dungeon requires a bit of legwork to get to, specifically to find the key to access it. We have to reach the southeastern part of the island, and this requires both some exploration, as well as my personal favorite story beat in the game: escorting Marin to the animal village. Her singing is needed to help wake up one of the animals blocking the road. You'll find Marin on the southern beach, where we washed up at the beginning of the game, where the citizens of Mabe say she regularly goes to watch the waves. Speaking to her, she invites Link to sit and share a moment together. Marin ponders where the coconut trees on the beach come from, explaining how Terran told her there's nothing beyond the ocean, but she doesn't believe him. Seeing Link washed up on shore was exciting for her because she believed Link was there to deliver them a message. She tells Link that she wishes she could be like a seagull, free to fly and sing for whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Turning to face the young man, she tells Link she hopes that she can learn everything there is to know about him, before sheepishly laughing it off. Link then explains that he needs her help in the animal village, and she agrees to help him. This is the first scene in the history of the series to show a character really shining as a character, a moment dedicated to Marin and her Pathos, how restricted she feels living on this small unknown island, loving the people but wishing so badly to spread her wings and explore the world beyond. Her crush on Link can be seen as both a childish crush most teenagers will experience at one point in their lives, and an extension of her infatuation with the outside world beyond Koholint's tiny shores. Her infatuation isn't a one-way street either, as the game teases that this could be your big chance when she joins you. By exploring Koholint with Marin, you can, for all intents and purposes, go on a date with Marin. I love this section of the game. In all versions, the moments are extremely cute, charming, and bring this already adorable character further to life. But the best part about Marin is that despite being a young innocent girl from a small village you'd assume doesn't have a mean bone in her body, she can genuinely surprise you with some of her dialogue. I won't dare spoil every moment with her, but I got a genuine laugh when playing the ocarina resulted in her mumbling under her breath that we weren't very good, and she'll call you out for rooting around in people's houses. The color version even has exclusive photos you can get of the two of them on their day out, forever immortalizing the moment when Link had a girl sit on him. Bringing Marin to the animal village, the villagers are all excited to see her, and after she helps us out by waking the sleeping walrus, she decides to stay in the animal village and socialize with them for a while. Link continues onwards through the Yarna Desert, beating up some familiar enemies from A Link to the Past to get the key for the next dungeon. At this point, I feel it's appropriate to bring it up, because the original Game Boy releases encourage you find and use them by this point. Warp holes, or warp points in the remakes. In the original games, there were 4 of these sprinkled throughout Koholint, and to use them you needed to walk into them and teleport in sequence until you came to the one you wanted. Not exactly smooth, but it was helpful to alleviate backtracking. In the remake, they reworked and expanded significantly how the warp points worked. Firstly, they doubled the amount of warp areas available to the player. 5 in the Game Boy games and 10 in the HD version. They also changed how the game's warp song, Mambo's Mambo, operated. A side note, this is the best warp song in the series. In the original versions, the song only teleported you to one location, Mambo's Pond, which severely limited its use cases. In the remake, it warps you to any available warp point. This alone significantly improves the HD version over its original counterparts, but thankfully the map is small enough across all versions that I don't feel the originals are too bogged down by it. On the way to the dungeon, we can help out the lost father who told us earlier he'd be stuck, and use our video game exploration skills to sniff out the dungeon's entrance behind a giant waterfall. I feel like it should be video game law. If you have a waterfall the player can reach, you are obligated to hide goodies behind it. Thankfully, Link's Awakening does this, and with cinematic flair. Welcome to the Angler's Tunnel. First off, I want to compliment the HD version's update of the dungeon theme compared to the original. The original song is extremely short, fast-paced, and above all, pretty bland. Not that it's bad, but it's not the best this soundtrack has to offer by any means. The remake takes the melody, extends the song's length, slows the pace, and adds backing instruments that create an incredibly relaxing and almost ethereal sounding piece. For a dungeon so themed around water, this version of the song is pitch perfect, and I applaud Nagamatsu's work here. The Angler's Tunnel is a neat dungeon. I find its exploration very good and unique, and the way it uses the viewpoints of specific screens to entice exploration is awesome. The boss key can be seen as early as the first minute of the dungeon, and several areas are blocked off by deep pools of water the player can't interact with. Fortunately, by reaching the midpoint and defeating the mid-boss, we get the dungeon item, the flippers. In all versions, this is always a part of Link, and it allows him to swim in deep pools of water. Thank goodness. While not an exciting item, this greatly opens up the exploration options for Link in both dungeons and the overworld, and it didn't cost us an arm and a leg like last time. To roll things back a bit, the dungeon's mid-boss, Cue-Ball, is the hardest boss in the dungeon. He runs around a track and attempts to ram Link. There are a couple ways to hit him, either by jumping over him and hitting his back, or rushing behind him to slam into him. The fight isn't difficult, but it requires some thought into how you avoid him and retaliate. Unfortunately, I think this fight can also be used to point at one of the areas this dungeon lacks, and that's puzzles. This place has one puzzle. Otherwise, it's a purely exploration-focused dungeon. That, in and of itself, isn't a massive issue, and I still enjoy this dungeon regardless, but it does mean that it struggles to compete with the best of the best in the series' history, considering those dungeons can do both and do them really well. The puzzle in the Angler's Tunnel is easily solved and doesn't even require the dungeon's item to complete. Kind of. You can make these jumps, but if you don't have the flippers, the game just won't let you continue onwards. It's a surreal roadblock the series doesn't normally use, and one of the rare times I can remember a Zelda game outright requiring you to own a dungeon item for progression instead of using said item to progress. All they had to do was push this upper right switch up and to the left a little bit. Problem solved. It's a very strange issue for this puzzle. Another very strange issue that isn't as easily solved is this dungeon's boss fight. If you've played Link's Awakening, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't, allow me to introduce you to the anglerfish. That was the anglerfish. You might be asking, did they update him in the re-releases? Barely. DX did nothing to him, and the HD version added a ramming attack that brings down rocks from the ceiling above to force Link to move lest he take damage. Unfortunately, even with the new changes in the remake, this is possibly the most pathetic boss fight in the series' long history, and that's saying something considering how many games we have left to go at this point. Filleting this fish does allow us to get our fourth instrument of the Sirens, the Surf Harp, and mark the halfway point of our journey. I enjoy Angler's Tunnel. Replaying it 3 times for this video did alert me to its major weakness, that being its puzzle element, but I love the way that the dungeon handled its exploration. Constantly guiding the player towards objectives without spelling them out dramatically meant that I could solve the navigation on my own through use of the map and areas around me. The HD version's seamless scrolling made this even easier, allowing greater field of view and less imagination required when I needed to figure out where to go next. I think so far, this is the greatest leap from the Game Boy to the Switch, with both the music and the screen real estate really enjoying the technological leap. The only requirement to reach the next dungeon is a single quest that doesn't really have to do with the main story. This ghost haunts Link and requests us bring him to his former house on the Southern Bay, and eventually his grave. Doing this will ease his soul and cause the ghost to disappear. That's about it. I don't really understand the idea behind this quest, since the ghost has no name or further information we can glean from the text. Every other pre-dungeon quest had named characters we could interact with and imprint on. Terran, Bowow, Richard, and Marin are all memorable, if simple characters, that we met and helped on Covalent. While I'm happy we could help this ghost out, this feels less like a heartwarming moment and more like padding to ensure we don't turn around to the next dungeon instantly. Because without this little detour, we can go right into the 5th dungeon without a care. I do encourage any players who might not have been participating in the side content to do so now though, as the second half of the game starts to see much longer and more complex dungeons, so having a Link kitted out with health and items will make your experience more comfortable. Diving into the 5th dungeon, Catfish's Maw, we come across one of the more well-designed dungeons in the game. Musically, both the Game Boy and HD versions do a wonderful job, with the original track taking perfect advantage of the hardware to create an imposing but exciting 8-bit theme. The HD version's added depth to the sound makes the imposing nature even stronger, but I thoroughly enjoy both versions of the track. This dungeon is extremely different from the first half of the game and asks a lot of the player in terms of their awareness and navigational prowess. It begins in an extremely linear fashion, giving away a small key and leading players towards the dungeon's mini-boss fight, a Stalfos Knight, now called the Master Stalfos. More upward mobility! Hilariously, this boss realizes that despite his promotion, he's in over his head and flees before Link can kill him. Strange, but at least we'll get an item out of... Oh. He stole it. Jerk. Yes, this guy is a bit of a trickster, hiding throughout the dungeon in 4 separate arenas to attempt ambushing and defeating Link. The best part of this manhunt is that while the dungeon is open to us, it's not entirely open. There are several large pits we can't cross yet, surely something the dungeon's item will allow us to do. By finding and defeating the cowardly Stalfos, we can finally get the dungeon's item, the Hookshot. It's just as solid as ever, and extremely helpful for completing the dungeon. Some clever design from the developers is having the final arena of the Stalfos near the beginning of the dungeon, meaning when you get the hookshot, you can immediately retrace your steps from the beginning with your new tool. A strange optional fight that the game has is against 2 Gomas, a boss from the first game. This isn't as easy as that game though, where they would go down in one arrow. This time there's 2 simultaneously, with expanded health pools. The fight isn't difficult, but its optional nature combined with its higher challenge compared to their original appearance does make it memorable. The dungeon's boss is the Slime Eel, which is kind of a pain in the neck. The boss's weak point is not always available, and is something Link has to expose with intention. The eel's tail sticks out of the center of the room and swings constantly at Link, with the head of the eel peeking from the crevices in the wall to try and chomp the young hero. By using the hookshot, we can yank the boss's head to us and slash at its weak spot until it goes down. This sounds simple enough, but unlike the cavalcade of simplistic and easy bosses of the first half of the game, this fight is actually fairly difficult. It's not impossible by any stretch, but the timing to dodge the tail swings, yank the head from the wall, and slash at it is much tighter than one might initially anticipate. This fight can end up taking a while if you can't nail the timing, so I suggest finding one side of the map to wait on to avoid wandering aimlessly for the boss's head to pop out. One nice thing about the fight is that, if you need a breather, you can hug the corner of the arena to avoid damage. Is it a bit silly? Yes, but since this fight has actual bite to it compared to previous bosses, I don't mind it. Beating the boss results in some odd dialogue about Link not understanding the truth of the island, but we still managed to get the fifth instrument, the Wind Marimba. The Catfish's Maw is a very unique dungeon when it comes to its set dressing, with the manhunt for the Master Stalfos and the item it stole, but results in a very solid and fun navigational dungeon. Using the map and pin functions to remember where you have to go and haven't been, using the hook shot to further explore areas you've been through, and the boss fight being a step up from all of the previous ones makes this a very good and solid start to the second half of the game. By this point in the game, if you've been following the trading sequence and secret seashells in both versions, you'll be able to complete both of these side quests. Kind of. By collecting 20 seashells in the original and 40 in the HD version, you can earn the Covalent Sword, the strongest sword in the game. It's our Master Sword equivalent in this game, and acts exactly the same as it does in A Link to the Past. A great reward for going out of your way to explore, and unique considering it's entirely optional to finish the game. If a player wanted to go through the entire game with just the first sword to challenge themselves, they could. Very similar to the first Zelda game in that regard. The trading quest also wraps up here. You don't need to do every part of it to complete the game, but by not doing that, you miss out on one of the more unique items in the series, the boomerang. Okay, hear me out. In previous titles, the boomerang wasn't much to look at. It could kill small enemies and stun larger ones, and its biggest use was bringing faraway items closer to you. That was about all it did. In the Game Boy versions of Link's Awakening, this thing has to have been coated in some radioactive material, because it shreds just about any enemy you throw at it. This is far and away the most useful version of the boomerang in the series to my memory, and it makes playing the Game Boy versions a fun and unique experience for the later half, considering how you can turn Link into a solid ranged attacker with it. Unfortunately, the HD version of the boomerang has been tuned down, and while it's still a good ranged weapon compared to other titles it features in, it's not nearly as strong as it was in its 90s heyday. A neat update in the HD version is that you can outright buy it though, compared to the originals where you needed to exchange an item for it, aka give away the shovel. Similar to A Link to the Past, there's also several smaller minigames you can participate in across Covalent. I like these a lot more than the ones in A Link to the Past, though I wouldn't describe them as very in-depth in the original Game Boy titles. Two of these you can find in Mabe Village, Fishing and the Trendy Game. Fishing is exactly what it sounds like. Grab a rod, rear back, and cast. It's not complicated at all, and is only needed for a single heart piece in the Game Boy titles. But here's where the remake decides to get cute with its completion requirements, as now the minigame not only hides 2 heart pieces, but multiple secret seashells and an empty bottle, as well as pieces for the dungeon builder, which itself has collectibles locked behind it. While the additional fish to catch are neat, it really stings that a previously harmless diversion has been expanded so much as to take several times longer to fully complete. The same can be said for the Trendy Game. In the original game, you only needed to come here to start the trading sequence and that was it. Any other engagement was optional. Now, not only has the game been made more difficult with genuine physics impeding your grabs compared to the originals, which isn't a problem, but it does make things harder, there's an astronomically large amount of collectibles here. 2 new heart pieces, 2 secret seashells, 2 dungeon pieces, and a myriad of optional figurines of Mario enemies you can place around Mabe Village. This is a cute inclusion, but again, why the heart pieces and seashells? The figurines were enough, honestly. They're entirely optional and a cute inclusion. It's more of the bloat the HD version has that I don't jive with. The last minigame is by far my favorite. In the original game, the Rapids Ride was purely a collection minigame. Pay money to ride a river current down the mountains and collect whatever you can along the way. Simple, but fun. If you knew the proper routes, you could make major bank this way. They do add some collectibles here in the remake like the other modes, but I don't mind it as much here as the entire point of this game is collecting as many items as possible in one go. It fits in very naturally with the original concept. However, the HD version does something I love. Adds an entirely new mode, the Rapids Race. And this isn't phoned in at all. To get every reward, you have to book it, using every angle and item at your disposal to speed the ride up. It took me a bit to hit the target time of 30 seconds, and was a genuine challenge I really enjoyed. Overall, I think the minigames are an improvement from A Link to the Past, both in the fact that they had rewards worth something, and are unique challenges you won't find elsewhere. Link to the Past didn't do much to change things up, asking you to play luck-based games or test skills you would already test in other areas of the game. All three games here have gameplay that's unique to them. Simple gameplay for sure, but they're good, memorable diversions. Plus, the Rapids Race in the HD version is the hardest thing this game offers. I'm dead serious. Give it a try if you get the chance. With the side quests done, it's time to head to the next dungeon. The key to said dungeon is hidden among ancient ruins, inside a maze crawling with Armos. The path there isn't very long, but it is a very difficult area compared to anywhere else on the island so far. The Armos seem to be guarding something, keeping this place hidden from the leering eyes of the curious. By journeying into this ruin, Link is blocked off by a large but familiar face, an Armos Knight, returning from A Link to the Past. While he may not have 5 other brothers to back him up, he's large and in charge, jumping around the arena with such force it can knock Link to the ground. With careful dodging, Link is able to take the Guardian down and acquire the key to the next dungeon. Continuing into the shrine though, Link finds not treasure or the lock for said key, but a stone carving etched into the wall of the shrine. Illuminating the room allows Link to see the text inscribed, which reads, "To the finder, the Isle of Colent is but an illusion. Human, monster, sea, sky, a scene on the lid of a sleeper's eye. Awake the dreamer, and Colent will vanish, much like a bubble on a needle. Castaway, you should know the truth." Dreams are a natural part of the human experience. Despite a majority of people being able to dream, whether it be consciously or not, science is hardly able to parse why we dream the things we do. For fictional narratives, using dreams can often be a tough act. Lack of care in using them can result in audiences not caring about the story, defeating the purpose of using dreams in the first place. The best stories that use dreams will often use them to explore the depths of a character's mind, or even the audience's. Link's Awakening opts to do both, and I believe it does it spectacularly. Link, from the inception of the series, has been intended to be the player's avatar. The character of Link in these earlier titles is player-driven. Your actions drive him, and your actions are what affect the world around you. Link's Awakening is the first game in the series to give Link, and therefore the player, a character that endears themselves to us. Marin. From the very beginning of the game, she's been a part of the adventure, finding Link on the beach and saving him, singing the game's signature theme and the best song in the game, pouring her heart out and being uniquely vulnerable with him, showing a mischievous and fun-loving side, and above all, being a gentle and caring individual who's touched the lives of so many on the island, not just Link. Colent Island in general is one of the more memorable video game overworlds I've ever played through. I can name most, if not all, of the NPCs off the top of my head, from Marin's mushroom-marveling father Terran, Madame Meow Meow and her cavalcade of chain chomp pets, Old Man O'Rira and his love of talking over the phone, Grandma Yahoo's excitable nature and love of sweeping, Christine the catfishing goat, Mr. Right, the poor sap who not only falls for the scheme but is a direct reference to SimCity of all games, Paw, the man who told us he would get lost in the mountains in the first hour of our adventure and then did, his identical quadruplets who live in Mabe that give us helpful tutorial advice then wave it away by saying, "Don't ask me what that means, I'm just a kid." These are just a few of the extremely memorable characters this game introduces us to, and it does such a good job endearing us to them through small but meaningful interactions. Sure, these people are odd and strange, but they're earnest and equally well-meaning. Seeing them interact with each other, moving throughout the world as you progress and living their own lives is its own sort of small reward. By discovering that Koholint and its inhabitants aren't real, a scene on the lid of a sleeper's eye, Link and the player are now forced to ask questions about their own needs. Escaping the island before wasn't a matter of if, but when. No one on the island sans the bosses were attempting to impede us, and in fact were generally pretty kind and personable in their own wacky ways, but those bosses, without the dream, they ceased to exist. Before Link's arrival, they didn't need to worry about the endless dream being interrupted, but as Marin and Terran told Link, the monsters of the island didn't start being aggressive until Link washed ashore. The monsters are aware of the danger Link presents to them, and are doing anything they can to stop it. In contrast to that, Marin's story is one of longing. While the monsters are content to perpetuate the dream of the Windfish, continuing their existence in the sham of a world, Marin wants freedom. She longs for the shores beyond Koholint, to spread her love of life past the constricted barriers of the island. While she seemingly never discovers her true nature as a product of a dream, I fully believe that if she did, she'd tell Link to wake the Windfish regardless, both to save her newfound crush in Link, but to save the people of Koholint from the unchanging reality of living in a dream world. But that's part of the genius of this story, because while I interpret Marin as a functioning conscious being with her own agency, who's to say her actions aren't those of the Windfish, or Link? Several of the obstacles and areas we've journeyed through share striking resemblance to the legendary hero's escapades, which the Windfish wouldn't have been privy to. I doubt the Windfish was fighting Armos Knights and Stalfos after all. The nature of Koholint as a dream does an incredible job raising questions of both the nature of self in the player and the characters through its use, and I applaud the writers for turning a seemingly simple plot point into such a powerful moment for the series. With this intense discovery, we stumble outside of the shrine and into the owl once again, who tells us that no one can really be sure if the text we read was the truth, besides the subject of the text, the Windfish. Unfortunately for the owl, the text was inscribed next to an illustration that featured this winged jackass, so his attempts at obfuscation are a little poor. But we have the key to the next dungeon, so at the very least we can continue to collect the instruments we need. The Face Shrine. My god. This place is dripping with atmosphere. Knowing what we know, that our actions might end with the destruction of the entire island, the music appropriately sets the tone. This is a dreadful piece, both on Game Boy and Switch, but the Switch version takes one of the absolute best songs from the original and turns it up to 11. The song's instrumentation, pace, and additions that weren't possible on the original hardware all create one of the absolute best pieces of Zelda music in the series. I implore you all to go listen to this music on your own time, because the sense of dread it instills in you as you stew in your new reality truly creates one of the best atmospheres of any dungeon in the series' history. On the gameplay front, this dungeon is split into two parts, a western front and an eastern front. The first half on the west is where we find the map, compass, and dungeon item are housed. This is a tricky segment to talk about because your experience will vary drastically depending on how you progress through it. On a first playthrough, it's entirely possible you run into dead ends and stumble around looking for the dungeon item. This is a pure maze, letting you get your bearings with both the dungeon's layout and how exploration will work here. Once you figure out how to reach the dungeon item, you can progress into the eastern half and begin the second half. However, the way the dungeon item is blocked off is not through a series of gates or challenges, but one wall that you need to discover. This means that if you know what you're doing on subsequent playthroughs, you can significantly cut down on the time required to get the dungeon item and alleviate the navigational element of the dungeon. On the one hand, I can appreciate this, as it makes repeat playthroughs faster. But at the same time, I find it a bit odd the dungeon wouldn't do more to ensure the rooms of the dungeon get explored before players can walk past them. The dungeon's item isn't even that exciting, being an upgrade to our power bracelet that lets us lift heavier objects. It's neat, and used effectively in the dungeon itself, but compared to the hookshot and flippers that gave us new traversal and combat options, it's a bit lacking. The dungeon features 2 mid-bosses, one new and one returning. The returning boss is another pair of Dodongo snakes, this time in a more dynamic arena with pits. It's a similar verse but the same as the first, and a healthy supply of bombs, will send them on their way. The next boss has a few different names, but I've known him as Smasher since I was young, so that's how I'll refer to him. This fight is cute, where Smasher will throw a heavy iron ball at Link, chase it down, and continue until he loses. Hilariously, if Link dodges and picks the ball up, Smasher will panic and start running around attempting to dodge Link, mirroring our own reaction to being attacked. It's not a difficult fight, but Smasher's design and his reaction to being attacked makes this a memorable fight for me. The second half of the dungeon uses crystal switches to good effect. They're used to solve puzzles in individual rooms as well as across the dungeon, and it means you'll be paying careful attention to each and every flip of the switch. The power bracelet upgrade might not be exciting, but it is used in several puzzles to good effect, and even lets you lift and throw these unique elephant statues that are more than double Link's size, making for a satisfying throw each and every time. There's even a creative puzzle involving knight pieces from chess. I like this puzzle in both versions, but the HD versions makes them much more consistent. In the originals, while the logic of throwing them is the same to get them to stand up, it feels random and less guaranteed than in the remakes, where they set dedicated tiles to land on, as well as tiling the floor like a chessboard to help players visualize it. Using all of these puzzles to find the boss key, we can finally fight the boss of the dungeon, Facade. Talk about an unsettling appearance. A giant face that emerges from the floor, Facade uses the very room you're standing in to attack you. Floor tiles, pots, and even creating pitfalls to swallow Link up. Both versions of the game, 8-bit and HD, are similar fights, but the HD version improves it slightly by having Facade move around the room compared to the static movement of the originals. Facade being a part of the floor means Link can't directly attack him with his sword, and the boss isn't stupid enough to tell us his weakness.
Interesting. You know what else is interesting? Grenades.
Yeah, it's not too difficult to figure his weakness out, and once you do, the fight becomes a matter of waiting for him to pop up, plant a bomb, and run. Nothing difficult, but it is a cool and unique fight compared to a lot of what Link's Awakening has offered so far. Once we beat him though, Facade doesn't promise worse things to come, or that he'll come back to defeat us. He warns Link of the truth. If he wakes the Windfish, everyone and everything on the island will vanish. I've avoided mentioning it until now, but the bosses of the game actually share a title. While A Link to the Past had boss keys, Link's Awakening has nightmare keys. The bosses of the game are, literally and metaphorically, nightmares. They understand exactly what Link escaping Koholint means for them, and will do anything to stop that from happening, other denizens of the island be damned. What's truly fascinating about these bosses is that none of them appear to be foreign entities to the dream. They all know and recognize the island as their home, and their only desire is to continue its, and by extension, their existence. These bosses aren't an overwhelming evil like Ganon beforehand, merely victims of happenstance. They're selfish, but they didn't make a point to attack others until they felt their own safety was threatened. What makes the Face Shrine go from a good dungeon with decent puzzle elements and good navigation skill checks to one of the best in the game is how well the story is utilized here. The atmosphere oozes off the screen, weighing down what would otherwise be business as usual with a heavy sense of unease. Is what you're doing right? Are these monsters and the people of Koholint deserving of being erased despite the risk to your own life? The Face Shrine forces you to face the issue head on. do you continue on, knowing full well what it means at the end? With the 6th of 8 instruments and the Coral Triangle now in our possession, there's only 2 dungeons left before we must truly reckon with these thoughts. These last 2 dungeons are located high in the mountains of Koholint, and will require some aid to reach. By using the Ocarina and searching Mabe Village, Link can help a legendary rooster recover from death. Seriously, look at him. He was a pile of bones before we found him. What did he recover from? Regardless, using the rooster to scale tall mountains is super fun. It's not often in Zelda games we can flat out fly, and this is the first instance of it in the series. While it's not completely free roam flight, it allows us to cross incredibly large gaps we couldn't in most other titles. With the rooster in tow, we can reach the Eagle's Tower, our 7th and penultimate dungeon. This is a very divisive dungeon. It's a big difficulty spike compared to the rest of the game, and requires a decent amount of brain power on a first-time run. The first half of the dungeon asks Link to literally collapse the tower from inside, smashing 4 giant pillars that release the floor above, and let Link access the nightmare above. While I understand those who get annoyed at this place with how large it is and how much memorization is required, I can't help but love this place. To start, the music is once again fantastic, both on Game Boy and Switch. I find the tone of the song really interesting, with the audio levels fading in and out as it goes. It creates a somewhat haunting peace, almost ethereal. With how the Face Shrine made players stew in their new reality, this song almost sounds like that reality lingering around our head, fading in and out of focus, a reminder that no matter how much we don't want it to be true, things are not going to end how we'd like them to. Eagle's Tower uses the fact that it is a tower to great advantage. The floors are not only connected by stairways, but pits you can fall through to land on otherwise difficult to reach platforms. I adore how expertly the floors are tied together, and appreciate that the game forgoes using the side-scrolling segments for this dungeon to instead focus on the tower itself. The side-scrolling segments of the previous dungeons, while unique, could often be seen as band-aids for weird navigational choices or get-out-of-jail-free cards for adhering to the shapes of the dungeon's namesake. In this case, the dungeon is properly designed well enough it connects in multiple ways without needing glorified teleports to move around the map. The most iconic part of the dungeon is for sure the 4 pillars holding the Nightmare Arena away from us. By finding and lugging around this iron ball, Link can chuck it into the pillars and bring them crumbling down. It's not only physically satisfying, but mentally as well. While running laps in the ice dungeon of A Link to the Past was a chore and rightfully critiqued by players at the time, I've never understood getting frustrated navigating the iron ball around. Using the layout of the dungeon to move up and down while paying attention to where the ball is and needs to go is exactly what makes Zelda puzzles great. It's a long-term puzzle that pushes players to pay attention to each and every bit of visual information on screen, and ends with the satisfying cutscene of the tower collapsing and changing the final layout of the dungeon, a scale we don't typically see for non-final dungeons in Zelda. The dungeon item is the Mirror Shield, returning from A Link to the Past. In the original games, this is an item check item and nothing more. You use it when it's needed and put it right back in the inventory so you can keep the Roc's Feather equipped. In the remake, it thankfully is as useful as it is in A Link to the Past, since it's always equipped. Otherwise, it's exactly what's advertised, so there's not much to talk about. The dungeon's mid-boss is the Grim Creeper, and despite the A+ name, this is a C+ boss. He'll show up, summon some bats, and if you kill them all in one wave of attacks, the fight ends. That's it. I may love this game, but the boss fights are not its strong suit. In fact, the nightmare of this dungeon isn't much better. If you like the Moldorm fight from A Link to the Past, you'll love this one. The Evil Eagle, ridden by the Grim Creeper, will swoop down and charge at Link, as well as attempt to push him off the tower with gusts of wind. While an intense-sounding fight, if you have the Boomerang or Red Tunic, this fight is a complete pushover. If you don't have these things, the fight is a complete pushover that goes on a bit longer. The only annoyance is if you fall off at any point, you reset the fight, and there's no way to recover hearts like in A Link to the Past. However, at this point, you should have more than enough health, resources, and feel for the control to not have any issues. Finishing the boss off results in another warning to Link, this one reminding him that he himself is in the dream and will erase himself if he goes through with his plan to wake the Windfish. While ominous, even as a kid I doubted this one off the rip. It's been made pretty clear that Link got trapped here, whether by intention or accident, but he's not a part of the Windfish's imagination. The biggest risk to Link is where he'll wake up when this is all said and done. Last we saw, he was being flash-fried by Zeus on the high seas, so at worst, this is all in fact the last oxygen-deprived breath of Link while he sinks to the bottom of the ocean as an overcooked shrimp. Something tells me that isn't the case, though. Once we collect the Organ of Evening Calm, there's only one dungeon left. It's time to finish things. There isn't much left to do on the way to the final dungeon. It's also in the Tall Mountains, so it's a straight shot west from Eagle's Tower. Our quest is diverted for a moment when we discover Marin stuck on a dilapidated bridge, but we swoop in to save her before things go south. She starts to tell Link something, but Terran interrupts the moment and Marin sheepishly leaves. The owl tells us that she was attempting to wake the Windfish herself, singing the Song of Awakening to the Windfish's egg in vain. What could she possibly be attempting to do? Crossing the last of Tall Heights thanks to the Mirror Shield, we can come across the quite literal Turtle Rock, looking less like a dungeon and more like an unfinished Mount Rushmore. Oh shit, he didn't like that, because now he's attacking. In the DX version, it's a total joke, just spam attacks until he goes down. But the HD version makes it a two-phased fight, having Link blast away at the rocks encasing it until you can effectively slash away. It turns the boss from a unique afterthought to a unique set piece. With its defeat, though, we can enter its now vacated shell and the final dungeon of the game, Turtle Rock. What a massive dungeon. Turtle Rock is pretty infamous for those who have played it as a significantly more expansive and intensive dungeon compared to all of the other ones in this game, sans Eagle's Tower. Taking place in what appears to be a dormant volcano, the aesthetic of this place on both versions is really impressive. The 8-bit version managing to visualize the heat haze emanating off of the lava especially wowed me, and overall this serves as a memorable final dungeon location for the series. The dungeon song is very subdued compared to the previous three, and while that may come across as strange for a final dungeon, I think it makes perfect sense. This isn't a triumphant moment or heroic trek, it's a quiet, intense resolve. By this point, we know what needs to be done, and are ready to do it, but that doesn't make it any easier. Not bringing attention to it will make it easier to swallow. As a dungeon, we go back to the shaped like its namesake design, and that does mean we end up with a significant amount of side-scrolling areas that connect to dead ends. This is one of the only major blemishes I have with the dungeon, the second being a singular crystal switch that only blocks the dungeon item placed ridiculously far away from said item. I understand what they were going for, but especially in the Game Boy versions, where the switch color doesn't indicate which flip it's on, this can be a nightmare if you miss the switch room or accidentally hit it twice without realizing. I would have put this switch closer to the item, or maybe added more walls to flip up and down at us. Either way, the rest of the dungeon continues the extremely solid design from the rest of the game. The most infamous part of the dungeon is this little device, a push rock. It's a unique puzzle, having Link create pathways and flooring by pushing the machine and controlling it as it runs. If it collides with anything, it explodes, meaning you'll need to leave the room to reset it. In the Game Boy versions, this thing has some of the most finicky and awkward controls I've ever experienced on a D-pad, which is baffling. This isn't Super Mario 64 DS. There's only 4 directions I could possibly go with this thing. Thankfully, the remake significantly improves the control, turning the puzzles into proper puzzles instead of solving both the control and the room. The dungeon includes a significant number of mid-bosses as well, several returning from earlier dungeons. This both serves to let players power trip with their incredible arsenals, and show how desperate the monsters are getting at this point that they feel the need to resurrect and pile on so many previous enemies on Link. They even bring in a new face, Blano, to try punching his lights out. While not a hard fight, this is a unique case of an enemy capable of knocking Link out of the arena, made worse by the fact that his punches teleport Link back to the start of the dungeon. Somehow. If you doubted it was a dream before, it's getting more and more blatant as we go. Regardless, if you avoid his attacks, this fight isn't difficult at all, and with his defeat, we can get the final dungeon item in the game, the Magic Rod. Returning from A Link to the Past, this little baby is even stronger now than it was then. Previously tied to Link's magic meter, this game doesn't have one of those, so this is now a solid puzzle-solving item and combat tool. Capable of lighting a majority of enemies aflame from range, this baby is a solid final item and is so good I kind of wish we had it a bit earlier to better take advantage of how strong it is in this game. With all of the items in the game at our disposal, the dungeon can now be fully explored, and it's a truly massive dungeon, especially for the Game Boy. You need to have full knowledge of your arsenal to get through here, and even get creative in how you take out enemies in order to fully complete it. They even put a heart piece in this dungeon, the final heart piece of the original title and one of the last ones in the remake, which appears to be a callback to Turtle Rock of A Link to the Past. It's a fun final dungeon, and while not as climactic as the previous 3 games, it serves as a great final test of the game's mechanics and your own problem solving. The final nightmare of the game is Hothead, and, well, he's pretty underwhelming. All he does is fly around the room splashing magma at us while we fire the magic rod at him until he dies. It's a two-phase fight, but there isn't a gameplay difference between them in the original titles, and the HD version only slightly switches things up. Hothead ends up being a perfect capstone for the bosses of Link's Awakening. Large, unique in design, and interesting to look at, but underwhelming at best and total cupcakes at worst. It's unfortunately the weakest part of an otherwise spectacular game. By defeating him, he calls out a desperate plea, asking us why we came to the island in the first place before exploding. With the final defense depleted, we can collect the Thunder Drum, our final instrument of the siren, and we are finally ready to wake the Windfish. In the original Game Boy titles, there's nothing else to do besides cleaning up things you left alone. The HD version does have some collectibles tied to Dompe's Dungeon Builder, which I did do for this playthrough, but you don't need to unless you're going for 100%. There's only one thing left to do before going to the Windfish's Egg. In the Koholint Library, there's a book called Dark Secrets and Mysteries of Koholint that's unreadable without the magnifying glass. By reading it, the book reveals the pathway through the Windfish's Egg. This pathway is somewhat random, with each playthrough featuring a different route chosen from a set of them. I'm not sure how many there are, but yours most likely won't be the same as mine, so memorize it or write it down before heading to the peak of Tall Tall Mountain. Before we do, I always like to talk to the Islanders, and specifically Marin, one final time. She knows that Link is going to leave the island soon, but she hopes that he never forgets her. And if he does, she'll never forgive him. There's that fire I love from her. Perhaps the most interesting thing regarding Marin is that we never do find out what she wished for from the Windfish. You can ask her, but she plays it off coyly, leaving it up to our imaginations. I have my own theory, but I'll save that for later. With everything cleaned up, we can head to the Windfish's Egg. We can finally play the Song of Awakening, or as Marin calls it, the Ballad of the Windfish. The egg cracks open, and the owl rallies us from atop the egg towards the windfish. Inside the egg is a strange foreign environment compared to the rest of Koholint. The original game's environment looked a tad generic, like countless identical blue dungeon rooms. But the remake? It has this wet-looking, ghostly blue that appears to be a liminal space. Liminal comes from the Latin word for limit, which means threshold, and this place is a perfect representation of that. We're so close to waking the windfish, but to do so we have to journey through this nearly endless expanse of rooms, nearly crossing a threshold ourselves. The music does an incredible job of setting the tone, with a slow, foreboding piece building the tension as you wander through these similar segues. Coming to the end of the path, Link comes across a giant pit. Leaping in, it appears to be a large arena with the windfish emblazoned in the center. We're greeted with our final obstacle, the nightmare. Not a nightmare, but the nightmare, the one responsible for placing the windfish in this endless slumber in the first place. Without anything else in the way, all that's left is this final battle. While the majority of the boss fights in this game are underwhelming, this is the one fight in the game that not only rises above that, but is a genuine challenge as well. Six phases of different, intense ideas that not only challenge the player, but also tie into the narrative as well. It's a fantastic fight, and it starts with this shadow form of a gel. While alone not a challenging phase, this is the game communicating to the player they'll need more than their sword to win the day. The only way to damage this thing is with magic powder. It sets the rule that you'll need to use several items in your inventory to win, and I think it does a good job. The second phase of the fight is against Aghanim, a villain the windfish absolutely should not have knowledge of. This nightmare isn't just the windfishes anymore, it's Link's. The nightmare is emulating his greatest foes, and showing Link his own greatest fear, his enemies coming back to haunt him, and those he cares about. While the Aghanim phase is just energy tennis like his physical counterpart, the thematic element, Link's fears coming to life, is so strong I don't mind the simplicity. The third phase is Muldorm, and while there's no pits to fall into, this thing moves extremely erratically. My only complaint here is that I think it should have gone before Aghanim, if only to more naturally lead into the next phase. Ganon, the King of Evil from A Link to the Past, back with all his tools from then. Blazing bats, his boomerang trident, and moving rapidly around the arena. This is the hardest phase of the fight, sans the final one, and it's appropriate that it's an echo of the king himself. He may have been defeated, but evil never truly disappears. The next phase is called Lanmola, but it doesn't look or really act like one. The nightmare teleports around the room and charges Link, making this phase a bit of a breather before the final and most challenging phase. Deathel, the true form of the nightmare. While its design may not be the most frightening, this creature is the most difficult fight in the game. Which isn't saying much, but let's give credit where it's due. This form has two arms that take wide, endless swings at Link, and while they start the fight synced up, as it moves around the arena, they slowly desync and make the timing needed to dodge them more and more difficult. The only way to damage this thing is by hitting its eye, and there's only two weapons in the original game capable of damaging it. The bow and arrow, which is tradition at this point, and the boomerang. The HD version adds the magic rod as another option in case you didn't get the boomerang, but regardless, after shooting the eye enough times, Deathel will fall. Deathel doesn't swear revenge or curse Link with its defeat. It can only fear what this means for it and our world as it disappears. The owl appears before us again, congratulating Link for defeating the nightmares, and explaining to him how he is a part of the windfish's spirit as the guardian of his dreams. The owl thanks Link for saving the windfish and flies away as the windfish himself begins to wake. The Windfish remarks about Koholint Island and how beautiful it was, but that it is in the nature of dreams to end. But he tells Link that because of them, and their memories of it, Koholint will never truly disappear. With a final booming request. Come, Link. Let us awaken together. Play the 8 instruments. Play the song of awakening. Waking up in the ocean, Link finds himself floating on the remains of his ship from the opening of the game. Situating himself on the driftwood, he's initially forlorn and saddened by the loss of Koholint and those on it, until the Windfish leaps overhead, reminding him of his words about the power and beauty of those memories. The game ends with Link smiling up towards the sky and the Windfish flying away. If you manage to beat the game without dying once, you get a secret ending that I believe ties the entire adventure up perfectly. What a spectacular game. What an emotional game. What an incredible game. I love Link's Awakening. Writing this script has been truly challenging for me, the most difficult process of the entire video. I wanted to do right by this title and show you guys why not only is this one of the best Zelda games ever made, but one of my favorite video games to this day. This game made me tear up when I first played it as a kid, and it remains the only Zelda game to make me ask if what I was doing was truly the right thing in the end. By creating such an engaging and memorable world, the developers did a fantastic job turning a very familiar and cliché "it was all a dream" plot into a powerful and emotional story about the strength of memories and the meaning we give them. None of the characters and places on Koholint Island were real, but their impact very much was. Watching them disappear into the wind as the Ballad of the Windfish plays never fails to give me chills. The ending of the game has a sad melancholy to it that most other Zelda games don't. In most Zelda titles, you save the world and are the hero of the land, celebrating the victory over a great evil and the dawn of a new day. Link's Awakening doesn't end with the defeat of a great evil, and you only end up saving 2 lives. Link's expression as he wakes is absolutely perfect. He's deeply affected by what happened, staring off into nothing with no answers for himself as to what happened. It isn't until he sees the Windfish overhead that he's reminded of his words. He has the power to keep Koholint alive through his memories, through his own living. They may not be with him in person, but they will always be with him in spirit. A personal reason I find this game so powerful is how much it respects the power of fictional narratives through its storytelling. Since I was a young child, I've always loved the Toy Story films. These films ask the simple question of, what if our toys had sentience, and how they would operate under those rules. Simple things for us, like donating an unwanted toy, became a traumatic and life-altering event for a toy. It greatly tuned my own tastes and attachments towards fiction and its power as a genre. It's also made needing to get rid of old toys infinitely harder than it reasonably should be. Damn you, Pixar. To that end, Link's Awakening can be seen as a commentary on the impact of fiction on us as people. The events and people may not be real, but their impact definitively is. While you aren't physically erasing an entire world when you turn off your TV or close a book, you are ending the stories. But the memories and emotions of those stories remain, and it's your living with those memories and realizing them physically through your actions that allow these stories to persist and grow despite not being officially continued. The world and characters of Link's Awakening are not the most in-depth world ever presented in video games, but it's the earnestness of the storytelling combined with the lack of pulled punches that makes this story so powerful all these years later. Marin as a whole remains one of the strongest characters to ever appear in the Zelda series. She may have few lines overall, especially compared to later major characters, but her personality and demeanor shine so brightly even through the dimmed screen of the original Game Boy. Watching her go from a well-meaning and mischievous girl to slowly falling for Link and helping him on his journey through the island is so sweet. Her being the one to teach Link the Ballad of the Windfish is perfect and makes the climax of the game that much more bittersweet. She handed Link the metaphorical knife that kills her in the end. But to that end, I believe Marin knew in her heart this was the only way for things to go. Link would leave her behind, and she saw the song as a way for her to be remembered by him no matter what. Marin's wish to the Windfish is never made clear. But with the ending of the game, and the secret ending especially, I think Marin's wish was quite simple. She wanted to leave the island with Link. And while none of the islanders appear to realize they live in a dream, including Marin, the fact that Link does remember, and does treasure her memory, means that she'll always be with him. A fact made all the more clear by the seagulls seen flying into the distance as the game fades to black. Or a sprite of Marin with wings floating across the screen in the original monochrome version. Yeah, this is a change I'm glad DX made, because what in the low-budget afterthought is this? It's hilarious now, but the redone secret ending is iconic and bookends the game so much better. Link's Awakening remains an achievement to this day, and while I said at the start of this video my aim was to see which of the three versions was the best, I can honestly recommend all three with wholehearted sincerity. They each have their own pros and cons, like the original being the most balanced of the normal difficulty modes, DX having the photo side quest, HD with its beautiful art direction and music remixes. I could go on, but in that same vein, there's weaknesses all three have as well. The original version can be buggy, has the least amount of content, and because of its Game Boy roots, might be harder to immerse yourself in. The DX version's added content might be seen as shallow at best and balance destroying at worst with the colored tunics, and the HD version only adds to that bloat with more collectibles than ever before, and even some performance issues the original releases never had, despite being on significantly stronger hardware. I say, play the version that speaks the most to you. DX and HD are both available on the Nintendo Switch, making them extremely accessible compared to the original release, but that release can be bought secondhand for fairly cheap regardless. However you do decide to play this game, I implore you, if you've gotten this far in the video and haven't before, do it. This remains one of the best 2D adventure titles in gaming history, even all these years later, and while its impact and legacy might not be as strong as the original trilogy of Zelda games, the memories it has created only grow stronger and stronger with time. I don't know what else I can really say about this game. This is the sort of game that leaves me wanting to endlessly gush to celebrate everything that it does, despite its flaws. Sure, there are little bits and pieces here and there that I could nitpick endlessly until I'm blue in the face, but I'd rather celebrate the beauty and wonder that this game is. great graphics regardless of what system you're playing on, the best soundtrack in the 2D Zelda library, and one of the best in the series period. For the first time, characters that feel real and leave an impact on you years after the fact, and most importantly, telling a genuine and emotional story that lives up to the series' namesake, Legend. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Seth. I appreciate each and every single one of you, and take care.